So welcome to the meeting. This talk about our democracy meeting. The last Monday of every month, formerly at the Marlboro Community Center, and now on Zoom. It's great to see you here. I want to start out by saying that the reason I am here is because I believe that democracy is the most beautiful example of human love that we will ever see. So I'm really behind democracy, and that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm holding these meetings, because I think talking about our democracy is very, very important, and it's really the basis of democracy. We can't have democracy if we don't talk about it. So the way this is set up, or I intend to set it up, is that when you are speaking, you'll be full screen, although for some reason I'm not full screen right now, but that's the way I imagine it working. And when someone else speaks, they'll come and be full screen. If you're not speaking, it would probably be good if you're in a noisy environment. It doesn't seem that anyone is, so we probably don't need to worry about it. I was going to say you could mute yourself, which is in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, the little microphone symbol. So we will be continuing these meetings to talk about our democracy meetings on the last Monday of every month at 6:30, and we will also be continuing the democracy forum meetings that we used to hold at the Strolling of the Heifers in Brattleboro and at the Brattleboro Memorial Library on the first Monday of the month. So the meetings were very close together. We're not sure that we'll continue to do that, but we will be continuing both meetings in the future. So tonight, I am pleased to present Nick Biddle, who is full screen on my computer. Is he on everyone else's? I don't know. Anyway, I'm pleased to welcome Brattleboro resident Nick Biddle, PhD. Nick is a retired professor of Latin American history. Nick and I met in 2017 when I walked into his Artrageous store on Elliott Street in Brattleboro looking for donations to get the We Celebrate Democracy Civil Rights for All banner. And Nick gave me a 20. Thank you, Nick. And
You're
since
welcome.
then, we've done a lot of pro-democracy stuff together. It's been great to work with Nick. And tonight, Nick is going to be presenting on let's see, Nick, maybe you should say it. It's called,
well, sure. You know, the title is The Politics of Debt and the Green New Deal, or Making the Green New Deal Real. But, and that's what I'm going to talk about. But I'm going to talk about the politics of debt far more than the Green New Deal. And given, you know, the audience, and thank you very much for being here. It's fun to have us still out here trying. I want to give a kind of a history of the politics of debt as it applies to the moment we're living. And that's what I'm going to go launch into right now if there are no objections. And please raise your hand, because I'm looking at, I see 3 screens and one of them is a blank screen. There's only 4 of us here. I mean, Woody and me and 4 others. And, you know, whoever's on the other side of the cameras. If you want to ask a question or intervene, interrupt, please do. I'll be sort of reading like this, so I'll see you if you do. So I want to start by talking about money. So we got these two things right here, the $1 bill, the $20 bill. We know that they are made on the same paper. I could rip these up right now and it would be just paper. But if I did rip them up, you would go, oh my God, he ripped a 20. The one, what the hell? That consciousness is so crucial to how we live, because this is just paper and we know it. And we remember when this paper had been part of the gold standard during which was 44 to 71, Bretton Woods. Nixon took it off in 71, August 15, 1971, because the government US government and the Vietnam War couldn't cover the debt it was creating with the gold at Fort Knox. Did that change things? Yes. But did it change the value of the dollar relative to the other currencies on the world? No. Over time, no. It still is the same in terms of being the primary monetary unit globally to which all other currencies are measured. And we continue to participate in thinking that 20 of these equals one of these. So let's go back to 1971 when Nixon did that. Lots of shit was going down. Carter came along, communes in Brattleboro, all that kind of stuff. But two things happened in the 1970s that not a lot of us paid attention to. In 1976, a Supreme Court case, Buckley v. Vallejo, unlimited, that's to say it took off all restrictions to campaign finance quantities. You could never, there was no cap on campaign finance contributions. 2 years later, Bank of Boston versus Belotti, Belotti, 1978, the Supreme Court gave corporations for the first time the right, as a free speech right, to contribute to political campaigns. This opened the door to what we know now, ultimately, as Citizens United, and there's actually one or two other decisions since then, that give corporations not only the right to contribute, but all the rights of the Constitution as individuals. The author of the majority opinion in Bank of Boston v. Belotti in 1978 was Justice Lewis Powell. Back in 1964 through 1971, Powell was a lawyer in Alexandria, Virginia, on the board of directors for Philip Morris Corporation, the lawyer representing the Tobacco Institute, involved in more than 20 cases representing big tobacco against all of the stuff that was coming against them. Good friend at that moment of the president of the US Chamber of Commerce, who invited Powell in the summer of 1971 to deliver an address to the annual meeting of the board of directors of the National Chamber of Commerce, which he did on the 23rd of August. It's a almost 7,000 word speech, 12, 13 pages, now called the Powell Memorandum. Number of academics, I can name a couple. David Harvey's one, a book called A Brief History of Neoliberalism, identify the Powell memo as the start and the blueprint for neoliberalism. The memo opens this way, quote, "No thoughtful person can question that the American economic system is under broad attack. The sources are varied and diffused. Perhaps the single most effective antagonist of American business is Ralph Nader. The passion that rules in him is aimed at smashing utterly the target of his hatred, which is corporate power." And it's corporate power that I want to underscore here. That's Powell's objective, to institutionalize and make untouchable corporate power from that point forward. It's a 7,000 word memo. I'd love to read many more parts, but in the interest of time, I'll read one more sentence that I think is extraordinarily crucial. From Powell, quote, "Under our constitutional system, especially with an activist-minded Supreme Court, the judiciary may be the most important instrument for social, economic, and political change." Boom. 4 months later, Nixon appoints Powell to the Supreme Court. And the game is on. From that moment forward, regulations eviscerated from previous campaign finance, a future is born of the labyrinth of corporate associations, think tanks, societies, political action committees, for which Powell clamored in his memo. Probably some of you, probably all of you, know this book. Jane Mayer, 2016, Dark Money. She's a New Yorker journalist. They're just amazing. If you haven't read it, please do. But if you have it, you'll see in the front cover, and then again in the back cover, charts of what she calls the network. And I'm going to now just take a photocopy, and the front cover is front cover details political and issue spending nonprofits, 501c4s, 501c6s. And so you can see right there, and you'll see anonymous donors, $485.7 million. This is accrued from 29 to 2013 IRS records. Let me read a little bit from it. It's, let's see, the Concerned Women for America got 11.4 million. Americans for Prosperity got 55 million. National Rifle Association, 6.6. Chamber of Commerce, 3.3. American Alliance, or Energy Alliance, 2.6. And on it goes. Club for Growth. The names are wonderful. Morning in America, All Votes Matter, etc. Anodyne names. But half of all that money went to this group. Center to Protect Patients' Rights. Well, what's that about? Could it be to actually help patients get better access to medical care? No. Could it be to improve the quality, no, the choice of medical insurance? Possibly. But no, the Center for Responsive Politics did an investigative report in 2012 on the Center to Protect Patient Rights, and demonstrated that in the 2010 election cycle, the center spent $23.2 million in political advertising, only 10% of which was directly aimed at arguing against the Affordable Care Act. 90% of it was given across the board to all Republicans at the state level who were on board attacking Obamacare. The Center for Responsive Politics called the Center to Protect Patient Rights, quote, a mysterious conservative group, unquote, the head of which had links to Charles Koch. And it concluded that all of this money, that's to say $287 million for the Center to Protect Patient Rights, and really the other $270 million to all these other organizations, was millions of dollars to feed politicians in favor of the Tea Party and its platform, Charles Koch, and the religious right. Not really a surprise to us now, but it really is. Anyway, it's egregious in my opinion. Backtrack a little bit. When in 1964, Johnson enacted Medicare, corporations went nuts. The leading right-wing politician you'll remember of those days, we all love, Barry Goldwater, gave a speech the day after Congress passed, or the Senate passed the bill. And this is what he said, quote, having given our pensioners their medical care in kind, why not food baskets? Why not public housing accommodations? Why not vacation resorts? Why not a ration of cigarettes for those who smoke and beer for those who drink? We all know Goldwater didn't stop talking about socialism, those Democrats. And that, that's an angle that Republicans have been taking against Democrats since Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal in the 30s. So let me quote from Republican Congressman John Tabor in his 1935 attack against the Social Security bill. It was, according to him, quote, designed to prevent business recovery and to enslave workers. Another congressman claimed it would undermine America by, quote, destroying initiative, discouraging thrift, and stifling individual responsibility. President Roosevelt's opponent in 1936 was Alf Landon, and Alf Landon called Social Security a cruel hoax, and he promised to repeal it, but he lost by a landslide. Republicans, nevertheless, they attacked Social Security all the time, right into the 1950s, until it became really clear that it was sacrosanct by that time, and it was solvent. Another component of Social Security that was there from the outset was health care. Franklin Roosevelt was very clear he wanted to provide health care along with some kind of monetary support for retired people. The American Medical Association in 1935 also made it clear it would find a way to to stop the Social Security Act if there was medical care included. And so Roosevelt withdrew it. The Democratic Party always had it in its sort of back pocket. And in 1960, senators proposed to add elderly care to Social Security in a bill. In the 1960 legislature, 45 senators voted in approval, among them John Kennedy. Obviously, the bill did not pass. Kennedy campaigned for president on the plank of what, and he coined the term Medicare to describe elderly care attached to Social Security. When he did that, the American Medical Association recreated its attack on this whole concept. And in 1960, it hired the new voice of the radical, well, it wasn't the radical, of the new voice for corporate, shall we call it power, corporate rights, whatever. A guy who was the spokesperson for the General Electric Corporation and the host of Death Valley Days, this just about 40-year-old actor named Ronald Reagan. Reagan, in 1961, recorded a 10-minute presentation, both audio and video, that was distributed in local TV stations, radio stations. It was made to be played both in video and voice, because that was Reagan's strength. That's to say, corporate boardrooms, et cetera, through 61, 62. Here's a set of quotes from that recording. Pretty soon your son won't decide when he's in school. I don't really know what that means. Where he will go or what he will do for a living. He will wait for the government to tell him. We are going to spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free. Reagan also used a long-standing aspersion in his recording against Medicare, that it was, as he called it, statist, meaning it gave the power of too much control to the government, which sort of equaled socialism to him. From Reagan, quote, "The US government owns 1/5 of the total industrial capacity of the United States. One of the traditional methods of imposing statism or socialism on a people has been by way of medicine." The act passed, nevertheless, convincingly, and both Goldwater and Lewis Powell complained and pissed and moaned, but it went forward, and not too many years later, Powell read his memo. Then he became justice on the Supreme Court back to 1971 through 1973, and the network that Jane Mayer describes is information with the energies and the theory of a new ingredient from an economist at the University of Virginia. His name is James Buchanan. James Buchanan has created, during the 1960s, an economic doctrine that he calls public choice theory. Public choice theory posits that all people seek profits no matter what they do. Businessmen on Wall Street, contractors on Main Street, and here's the kicker: bureaucrats in the federal, state, and local government, teachers, what have you. They're all looking for their best advantage. They want more money. That's the American way, he says in his book, The Calculus of Consent. He adds that when Americans or their political representatives vote for social programs or other large-scale government programs like Medicare or the Interstate Highway or the Environmental Protection Act, there are many players involved and many interest groups become active in seeking their best advantage. And in the case of social programs, which are paid for by tax dollars, bureaucrats have no interest in cost saving. In fact, the exact opposite, according to Buchanan's theory. And therefore, every government program creates overinvestment due to the bureaucrats that are padding the costs along the way. He called it overinvestment. We all understand it as waste, inefficiency, overspending, etc. On top of that, Buchanan argued that the large portion of all these social programs are paid for by a small minority of the population who are the elite, the 1 and the 0.1%, who in the 1970 or 75, the 0.1% paid up to 70% of income in income taxes. And Buchanan said every time that happens, they're paying involuntarily, and they are a minority in the American population. And this is an example of what the founders called a tyranny of the majority. And therefore, it's unfair and essentially undemocratic. Now that's the twist. We all know it as progressive taxation. Buchanan called progressive taxation discriminatory taxation. Lewis Powell, in his memo, called that same taxation. Let me see if I got the memo. Where is it? Blah, blah, blah. We'll just hold with it, discriminatory. From that moment forward, with Buchanan's additional academic University of Virginia sanctioned theory, Lewis Powell and the Supreme Court, it was just a question of money. And the first person to step up, again, you guys might remember, all you people might remember, Richard Mellon Scaife, the son of the Andrew Mellon and Richard King Mellon Scaife, or Richard King Mellon Foundation or fortunes. Richard Mellon Scaife, through the 1970s, funded people like Buchanan. He paid for an institute at the University of Virginia. Buchanan got kicked out because he was too doctrinaire, wasn't listening to other points of view. Virginia Tech University picked him up, institute there. Richard Mellon Scaife is funding him millions of dollars a year. Another Scaife Foundation in California called the Institute of Contemporary Studies holds a conference, 1973. Buchanan goes there with the Scaife director of the foundation, charitable foundation, a guy called Richard Larry. And they meet with Governor Ronald Reagan's inner circle, Ed Meese, Anthony Kennedy, a number of others. And there, Buchanan introduces his plan. He calls it the third century. Quote, to create, support, and activate an effective counterintelligentsia to transform the way people think about government. Buchanan gushed in the necessity to, quote, pull together the like-minded and seed a new crop of surrogates who could be indoctrinated with intellectually compelling arguments and then mobilized, organized, and directed to spread them in a strategic manner. If the job was done right, he promised, ultimately in time, this new vast network of political power will be the establishment, unquote. Buchanan and Powell overlapped completely. And Scaife was paying for both, so that's not a surprise. But into this mix at that very moment walked a guy, again at about 40 years of age, very intelligent man, 2 degrees MIT, millions of dollars in his trust and his background, a guy named Charles Koch. Charles Koch started at that moment to pick up where Richard Mellon Scaife couldn't. And Charles Koch is the major funder of everything that Jane Meyer documents. Now, let's think for a second, or I just want to make 3 points. The goals of this group, this coterie of elitists, billionaires, and weirdo right-wing thinkers. Goal 1, to transform the way people think about government. That's Buchanan. Goal 2, to make the protection and enhancement of corporate profits and private wealth the cornerstone of the legal system. That's Powell. 3, to end or dramatically curtail what Powell called inequitable taxation, what Buchanan called discriminatory taxation, what you and I know as progressive taxation. That's all of them. That became, starting in 1973, the blueprint for what we now call the Reagan Revolution. On January 20th, 1981, Reagan gave his inaugural address as president. And it overlapped with the Powell memo quite considerably. Quote, we suffer from the longest and one of the worst sustained inflations in our national history, and those who do work are denied a fair return for their labor by a tax system which penalizes successful achievement. And then Reagan throws in his real, I'd say his most influential rhetoric. Great as our tax burden is, it has not kept pace with public spending. For decades, we have piled deficit upon deficit, mortgaging our future and our children's future for the temporary convenience of the present. You and I, as individuals, can, by borrowing, live beyond our means, but only for a limited period of time. Why then should we think that collectively, as a nation, we are not bound by that same limitation? Followed by the most important line. In the present crisis, Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. With that salvo, the Reagan Revolution opens. And immediately, as we'll all remember, comes Reagan's first bill, which is called the Economic Recovery Tax Act. And it purports what David Stockman called supply side theory. And we'll all remember supply side theory. David Stockman spent the summer of 1981 telling Congress that by cutting taxes for the rich would take their new savings, put them back in the market. Those monies would generate so much commerce that we would have commercial and sales taxes that would override the volume of tax cuts or compensate for those cuts and in fact grow the economy. As you know, as I was thinking about this as a waiter back in the days and a bartender, did you ever find a rich person who tipped as well as a worker, as a fellow bartender, as another middle class laborer? I never did. The concept of the rich putting their money back into the system when they already have so goddamn much money is so preposterous, and everybody knew it. It did not matter. Reagan had his majority. In August, the bill passed. David Stockman was a celebrity for a while, but only 4 months later, getting overconfident or comfortable in his status, Stockman admitted to William Grider, one of my favorite economic journalists of the period. He admitted to Grider that the whole supply side theory was a Trojan horse, and this is a quote, a Trojan horse to reduce the top tax rates for the rich, unquote, period. But Reagan set in motion in that period the other portions of his inaugural speech. And in doing so, he really instigated what we now call cultural and or identity politics. And you might remember how he talked repeatedly about the African American welfare queens riding their Cadillacs to the grocery store to use food stamps for their groceries. And he would talk about that by way of rationalizing cuts to Social Security, cuts to other social programs, because we had deficits that needed to be reduced or everything would fall apart. That set of politics is really gruesome and continues to this moment. The third component of the Reagan Revolution was lionizing military spending as patriotic, innovative, and sacred. 20 years before Reagan, in his going away speech, his talk to the American people prior to Kennedy's inauguration, Eisenhower gave his famous speech in which he coined the term military-industrial complex. And he was way afraid of the military-industrial complex and destroying American democracy. And it's an amazing speech. I read it to myself once every couple months to re-energize my energies. In 1984, John Kenneth Galbraith, covering the Reagan, economic system, wrote an article And he pointed out, quote, the Reagan administration has abandoned any effort at control of the military-industrial complex by according major authority in the Defense Department and over the armed services to executives from weapons corporations. This is not civilian control, but rather incestuous administration of the military-industrial complex by the military-industrial complex for the military-industrial complex. A year earlier, we'll remember in 1983, Reagan proposed the Strategic Defense Initiative, which quickly became known as Star Wars, the satellites that were going to blow intercontinental ballistic missiles out of space with lasers, an absolute impossibility that no engineer, that no scientist said was anywhere near possible. Reagan committed billions and billions to this technology. I researched the US State Department archive in its description of Reagan's proposal for SDI, or Strategic Defense Initiative. And this is what it says. Reagan was interested in pursuing the technology to silence domestic critics concerned about the level of defense spending, unquote. One of those critics in 1986, talked about how he had looked at all the defense spending and its increases and discovered that there were very few products that came out of this increased defense spending. However, as he pointed out, the investment accounts of the Pentagon had doubled between 1980 and 1985. Galbraith nailed it. Reagan turned control over the Defense Department and the armed services to executives from weapons corporations. And there's no evidence from then till now that that status quo has changed. We know, and let's see, every Republican president since Reagan, starting with Reagan, until now, expands the deficit with defense spending. And every Democratic president reduces the deficit. Both of them simultaneously cut social spending, particularly Clinton, as it turns out. I don't know, Arlene, are you there? I'm looking at a screen that says Arlene Disler. Here's a funny graph. It's funny because where it goes down, that means the deficit is going up, and where it goes up, that means the deficit is going down. And it just shows that what I just said, that all Democrats reduce the deficit, all Republicans grow it. And the only time that there's been a surplus since 1980 was Bill Clinton, which is not necessarily a good thing, because what Lewis Powell and Citizens United has done is consolidate a political structure in which our politicians are paid for. And as Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks puts it, Democrats are paid to roll over while Republicans are paid to fight. And Clinton rolls over, reduces the deficit. Bush comes in, grows the deficit. Obama comes in, reduces the deficit, etc. So let's get back to this question. Does the US government work like our household economically? We have to imagine, or we have to remember, that in every dollar, 20 or a 1, it says, this note is good for legal tender, public or private. And that the Federal Reserve is the only institution that has the authority to order the making of money and its spending. When we look around the world and see that the US is still the economy of last resort and the dollar of last resort, there is actually no consequence to deficits, though the politics of debt would suggest there are. The Republicans prove it. In 2014, the Senate, controlled by Mitch McConnell, demanded that the Pentagon do its first audit ever. Ever. Never had been audited. They thought that it would be just one more thing they could embarrass Obama with. The Pentagon completed the 2015 fiscal audit. Well, the fiscal year ended June 30, 2016. On July 26, 2016, the Inspector General of the Department of Defense published this letter. I'll read the first sentence. Army and Defense Finance and Accounting Service Indianapolis personnel did not adequately support $2.8 trillion in third quarter adjustments and $6.5 trillion in year-end adjustments made to Army General Fund data during fiscal year 2015 financial statement compilation. Read like a computer. That letter made it into the press. And quickly, the Fiscal Times, The Economist, and Forbes magazine had articles. What's going on? And it's amazing. That sentence means that the Department of the Army received $100 billion in fiscal year 2015 out of an $850 billion budget for the Pentagon. But the Department of Army, in its audit, showed $6.5 trillion unaccounted for, not one receipt. Scholars and journalists continued to look into it. Forbes printed another article about 2 years later, says, has our government spent 21 trillion of our money without telling us? Showing, again, that every year the Pentagon manages to run up roughly $1 trillion of additional spending that has no accountability. And you don't hear a Republican talking about it. You don't hear a Democrat talking about it. But I have the report, and I can send it to you if you'd like. And you know that photocopy I showed of the letter, that's still a public document. The Pentagon has never denied these figures. However, Forbes, again, another Forbes article,
pointed out that in 2017, the Pentagon became concerned that the audit would reveal sensitive information. And several months later, the, quote, Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board, unquote, posted a recommendation that, quote, the government be allowed to misstate and move funds in order to hide expenditures if it is deemed necessary for national security purposes. Game over. That's why Congress, including our senator from Vermont, never mentions this stuff. National security. It's treason to question it. And yet, for a brief moment, we have had a window into how much the Pentagon spends since Reagan gave the corporations control over the Pentagon's allocations. Deficits don't matter. The politics of debt matter. We face the future. It ain't looking pretty. And we know that the Green New Deal is out there. And the Green New Deal is called the New Deal for a reason. And if it is ever to become real, then we're going to have to make reference to this artificial politics of debt, this consistency of deficit spending that Republicans employ, and the lie behind it all, in the interest of human survival, which is exactly what, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says generally. That's her intention, et cetera. And I think we know that, that Bernie isn't exactly the same. And so, given that, well, anyway, I'm going to stop right there and hope that you guys want to talk about this.
Well, I'd like to say something. Very, very interesting, Nick.
Thanks.
Yeah, incredible. It's mind-boggling.
I see
you've got a grip on it, but I'm not sure I can get it.
There's one hand right there.
Yeah. Yes.
This is
Can I say something? Can I say something? This is Doug.
Hey, Doug.
Bernie has been using an advisor named Stephanie Kelton.
Yeah, I know.
And she's an expert on modern monetary theory. And Stephanie and two other young ladies from the next, what's it called? The next system, the next something system, the Democratic Collaborative.
Yeah.
Also understand modern monetary theory.
Yep.
And I've been talking through to one of them, and also with Bernie's energy advisor, Katie Thomas, and about technical things regarding shutting down, the petroleum industry. I used to work for Exxon back in the 70s, 70, 71, 72. And I left because I had greater aspirations than being a petroleum engineer, but I understand how they think. So I can advise Katie Thomas on a few things, but I'm not a total expert on energy. But what I've learned is that I believe Bernie understands that doesn't matter, because you can, according to Stephanie Kelton, you can print as much money as you want, as long as there's goods and services to balance that. So I'm wondering if you have based some of your comments or considerations on modern monetary theory. I have a friend in Westminster West who thinks it's a bunch of bunk, but it sounds good to me. I'm not an economist, but if is based on Stephanie Kelton's explanation, it sounds like it's a way to get ourselves out of the climate debacle and all kinds of debacles.
What's your name?
Doug Grant.
Doug. Hey, thanks for that. Yeah, I know Stephanie. In fact, I had a wonderful conversation with her in 2016. This is her newest book, and she just finished last week 8 weeks of online seminar, 1 week per chapter on this book.
Oh my God.
She's trying to expand, the popular concept and understanding, and I participated in that. And yes, of course, all of my comments are based on her foundation, really, not just hers, but the people she's worked with. But my intent is to demonstrate its history so that we can point to that and name it. That these lies and these deceptions have to be uncovered. But yes, indeed, the question about modern monetary theory for anybody who thinks it's bunk is really about inflation and how you manage inflation. And tonight is not the night to begin that talk, Doug, but I am very interested in that.
And then what I tell my friend is we've been doing this as Ronald Reagan. just like you showed in your chart. We've been doing it. We proved that it works. So.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that's why Bernie never mentions this, and yet just says, in every modern in the most advanced society in the history of civilization, we can do healthcare. We can relieve our students of debt. We can do that. Well, yes, we can, if we choose to. But we can't, quote, choose to until we get a political movement that opens the door to it.
I'm just wondering if Bernie has had any influence on Joe Biden or, Bernie is such a brilliant guy in some ways. I think he doesn't express any interest or even mention modern monetary theory because he knows 99% of the population wouldn't understand it.
But Stephanie has been his economic advisor since 2015.
Yeah, I know. I learned that a couple years, last year, I think.
Yeah.
So I really wish that we can't talk about Bernie being president, but if that information that he has, that understanding, could somehow find its way to Joe Biden, I just hope so.
Well,
I'd like to spend an hour talking about modern monetary sometime.
Well, let's have coffee.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
So I came late. This is Arlene.
Hey, Arlene, how are you?
I'm good. But Paul Krugman, that's his thing too, right? This isn't some way out there theory. He's considered, a big deal in economics, and he talks a lot about deficit spending, and it's not a bad thing. So hopefully he has the ear of some important people.
Well, I agree, and as Doug was pointing out, and Stephanie and Bernie, the Green New Deal is based upon modern monetary theory. Modern monetary theory will require a politics of refuting the debt politics that start with Reagan. And so that's actually refuting the same politics that Franklin Roosevelt confronted in 1933. So, there's a real continuity that way.
Mhm. Are you hopeful that it will happen?
I have no other thing to be hopeful for.
Have to be.
Now,
Okay.
who are you? You have a question, or you had a question, but you haven't asked it. I'm looking at a screen. I'm seeing somebody just to the left of Doug. I don't know who that is.
Is it Bob Anderson? I don't know. Bob, did you have a question?
Yes, it is Bob.
Yeah. You need to unmute yourself.
I thought I did, yeah.
There you go. You are
Sorry.
now.
Yeah. So, I'm not speaking in defense of anything that Nicholas has talked about in the politics of debt. I think, essentially he's correct. I think there's you might say a higher authority about all of that to which we all subscribe, and that's simply human nature. We want more, we want what is best, and it's just a natural human instinct. And so I think some of that can be ascribed to that. I mean, there's corruption naturally, quite a great deal of it. But I've myself have begun to think that the most important thing for people, for society, is that we be fulfilled. That is, we have a family, if we choose, we have something meaningful to do, man or woman or both, someplace to go. And so it matters less what it is that you're doing. It just matters that you have someplace to go, because I think that so much of your identity comes from what it is that you do. And I think that's certainly for me become an overriding consideration, even though I'm retired.
I certainly agree, but I'm not quite clear how does that impact trying to save the world by pulling the veil from the lies of the politics of deficit so that we can make the collective choice to give it a shot.
Saving the world is a little more difficult than it seems. We've been through countless evolutions of doing the right thing, only to discover it's the wrong thing. And this is, I think, an infinite cycle, frankly. It's not a good one, but I'm not sure that history has an alternative that I'm aware of.
Arlene is not happy to hear you say these things.
I'm sorry, who is? I didn't hear that.
Arlene is not happy to hear you say these things.
Well, the future is not rosy. I have to be honest, from my point of view.
I'm not a cockeyed optimist. But I guess I am an idealist.
I'd like to say that I am too. I hope for the best, and I'm very much infatuated with AOC and the movements and the influence that she has projected as a very young woman in her first term in Congress. And I do see a trend in the Democratic Party, which is a good one. I believe in health care for all. I believe in retirement. I believe in a safety net for the unemployed. All of those things. There's plenty of argument about the best way to get there, and I'm not offering any particular arguments. I'm old enough now just to watch what happens. And I don't agonize over it, but I think about it a lot.
Other comments? Yes.
Stephen here. Well, you certainly reinforced what my perception was of the same decades, and it really is a reaction action that I see keeps repeating itself in American politics. There's nothing unique about the Supreme Court or Powell protecting the interests of the wealthy or the well-connected. At one time, the Supreme Court was mostly motivated to protect the interests of farmers because that was where the wealth was. And then it became the Carnegies and so forth in the golden era of corporate moguls. And now it's the big international businesses or firms that, we can't afford to let them go bankrupt. So anyway, that's kind of depressing, the fact that really nothing's changed there. And perhaps the so-called founding fathers, really had that in mind in terms of the balance of power between the various. There certainly was much expression of fear about empowering the House of Representatives too much. So that is the sort of the game set that we have been dealing with, and it's not surprising that history keeps repeating itself in terms of where we fall short from the ideals of democracy. On the other hand, since I was a kid, the 60s, 70s, there's no doubt that there has been social civil rights progress in our democracy. I have to take some solace in that pendulum is not a pendulum swinging back and forth so much as a continuum of increasing recognition of civil liberties. And that certainly is something happening worldwide to a lesser degree in some places and to a greater degree in other countries. Anyway, thanks for your words, and appreciate the perspective and reminder of all those steps. I imagine that there also is a parallel lecture by the extreme right of putting together all the pieces of this QAnon group that is, swinging everything to the left and controlling the government from that end. An interesting paradox, but probably true.
Well, Stephen, there is nothing parallel about QAnon. Grounded
Well,
on this earth.
Okay. I'm sorry, I stepped too far there. I'll step back. Anyway, thanks once again.
Thank you. Yeah. Yep.
I think that's a good place to wrap it up. What do you think, Nick?
Sure, man. I enjoy. Thank you very much, people, for letting me present and listening. And I don't know you personally, but perhaps I can. I'm in Brattleboro. You're somewhere in the vicinity. We can talk about these things at greater length, and Woody is the contact person.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks, Max. That's interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.